Hey everyone, welcome back to Worth Second Chances Community Check-ins. Today I am joined by Kathryn Kernohan, so thanks for joining us, Kathryn.
No worries, Jess. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so you are the media manager at Jesuit Social Services. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your role, how long you've been in it, kind of what an average day might look like.
Sure. Been with the organisation for 6 years now, or just over 6 years. As media relations manager, it's my responsibility to, I guess, make sure the great work that our programs do and that our policy and research teams do as well, that they don't sit on the shelf, that we can bring them to life, whether that's through traditional mainstream media, whether it's through other communications channels like social media and website and various publications. And a really crucial part of that is participant voice. So what that is that capturing the experiences that our participants go through, the people we work with every day, making sure that their voices are heard and that we can provide platforms for them to share their stories publicly and hopefully help us as an organisation advocate for change.
Yeah, awesome. And that kind of leads me to a second question that I had, or our first question rather. Why is it that participant voice is so important when it comes to advocacy for those who might not know?
Yeah, sure. It really humanises issues. So I think when we're talking about groups of people, like young people who might have contact with the justice system, for a lot of members of the community, they just see that group of people as a collective. They may not have ever met somebody, or they may not know an individual who has had contact with the justice system. So it's easy to kind of read media headlines or hear things on the radio about young people committing crimes and just think of people as a collective, where of course what we know is that each person is an individual with their own backgrounds and experiences and factors that led to them having contact with the justice system, and of course, like all of us, their own aspirations and goals and dreams as well. So by providing a platform for people to share their own stories, it really humanises issues. It's an opportunity for members of the public to hear directly from, in this case, a young person who's been involved with the justice system, some of the factors in their life that led to them having contact. We know a lot of those issues are really common across the board, really common sort of factors in terms of disengaging from school and maybe having mental illness as well, maybe having sort of a family breakdown. They're really common factors. So for people to be able to hear that, it allows them, I suppose, to empathise a little bit more because they can see that person's unique story. They can perhaps put themselves in the shoes of that person, or they can think that, I'm hearing about a 16-year-old child and I've got a 16-year-old myself. I could picture what it would be like if it was my family in that situation rather than just someone else, a stranger. So it's really vital. And in terms of media as well, I pitch to media and handle our media requests as well. And it's what the media want to hear from, whether we're talking about people involved in the justice system or the various other groups of people that Jesuit Social Services works with. What the media want to hear from are those real life stories about people who have spent time in detention. What is it like? What is it like leaving prison? What are some of the experiences the hardships and challenges you've faced in your life and how you're working to overcome them? Of course, all of that needs to be backed up by the view of experts and by statistics and research. They're a really crucial part of the mix as well. But by and large, what the media wants to hear from is those people who've directly had experience with justice or another service area.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense because I think as human beings, it's so hard to put yourself into someone else's shoes and empathise without, I guess, a face to connect with, but also story being so important, just as how human beings have communicated for so long. So, yeah, I think you're right. I've seen a few of our videos on the website that I hadn't seen prior to managing Worth a Second Chance, and I was just so incredibly moved by them because they were, honest, authentic stories. And so you're right, for the person that doesn't have a lot of knowledge or a lot of contact with someone in the justice system, absolutely integral. So how do you go about collecting these stories?
We're really fortunate at Jesuit Social Services that we deliver a large number of services, including programs to young people involved in the justice system. So every day we have workers who are meeting with young people, are hearing their stories, and are assisting them to move towards more positive futures. So as media manager and our broader communications team as well, we work really closely with our program team. We're able to work with them to identify people we're working with who might be willing and capable of sharing their stories. And we really take the time to build those relationships as well. So Jesuit Social Services, we talk about our way of working, which is very much a relationship-centric way of working. It has relationship at its core, and that's certainly how we work as well as part of the communications team. So building relationships with young people, speaking to them, talking them through, if it is, for example, a mainstream media opportunity, talking them through exactly what would be involved, the kinds of things they might talk about, the kinds of things they may not want to talk about, sort of really getting a sense of their journey and what they feel comfortable with, because of course making sure that the young person is really comfortable and happy with how they're portrayed is absolutely vital.
Absolutely. I can imagine those relationships and relationships of trust as well, to be able to support a young person in opening up and sharing that story, because I imagine it's a very vulnerable and maybe perhaps traumatic process of just being able to retell. So making sure they feel safe to do so, I'm sure, is integral to that process. What are the things that a participant, and in the case of Worth Second Chance, we work directly with young people. So in the case of a young person, what do they need to consider when they are sharing their story publicly, maybe through mainstream media outlets, on social media, stuff like that?
Sure. I think that the number one thing they need to consider is the potential implications of sharing their story. So, for example, we know that if a story appears online, whether it's on our website or whether it's on a newspaper, a newspaper's website, that story can potentially live on for a long time. You can't necessarily delete things from the internet with no trace of them. So, when we are sharing the stories of young people, we make it really clear that them, for example, if somebody down the track Googles their name and they've used their real name in a story, that could potentially be able to be found at a later date. So, we make sure young people are really comfortable with that process. Quite often we will work with the young person to change their name to make sure that they can be disassociated from that particular story for when they've moved on in their life, they've started a new chapter of their life. It's very common as well for young people to choose to be de-identified. So a young person might be happy to speak to a media outlet or to be filmed for a video, but they don't want their face shown because they don't necessarily want their colleagues or their classmates knowing about some parts of their background. So making sure that young people really are able to give informed consent. They know exactly where a story might go, where it might spread, how it might be shared, how it might be used. They're probably the main things for someone to consider.
For sure. And do you find that's normally like a long process, or does it sort of change young person to young person or person to person when you're sort of going through all that with them?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably varies depending on the nature of the individual and what we're talking about as well. Obviously, if it's something really high profile like a television interview that could potentially be seen by a lot of people, a wide audience, that might be different consideration to something that's on a smaller scale, or something we might be doing for one of our internal communications channels, for example. So it probably really does vary, but I'm a former journalist myself. Before I started in this role, I was a newspaper journalist as well. So I was used to being on the other side and being the person who was looking for those stories, speaking to people like me now. I'm speaking to people to gather those stories as well. So, so I've got an understanding of what kind of journalists and media are looking for, and that means I'm able to really make sure that everything aligns and that everybody's happy. I mean, ultimately, what we want is, if a young person is sharing their story with media, we want everybody to be happy. We want the media to get what they want, to make it a powerful story and an interesting story, meet their objectives. Most importantly, we want the young person to feel comfortable and satisfied with what they spoke about, and
Yeah.
be proud of their involvement, really.
Absolutely. And that leads me to my final question that I have for you, which is, um, how do young people benefit from sharing their story? And do you have any examples potentially of a young person benefiting from sharing their story?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When it's done well, when a story is shared well, whether it is through media or through a different channel as well, I find that young people feel really sort of grateful for the opportunity and really empowered to know that their story can potentially make a difference. So, one example is a young man named Charles who has had involvement with our youth justice programs for a period of time. His video is actually on the Worth a Second Chance website. If people wanted to go and have a look at his story, that was a little video filmed with a filmmaking crew over, it was probably a 2 or 3 month period in terms of working with the young person to make him comfortable and going through sort of some sample questions with him, so he wasn't put on the spot when it came to filming. He had an understanding of what would be expected of him and asked of him. Um, and when he saw the finished product down the track, he was just really quite blown away to see himself on the screen articulating some of his experiences. And that video was actually produced to show to a wide variety of audiences. We've shown it at fundraising events, we've shown it to decision makers and supporters, and him having an understanding that his story would help make a difference. It would help make a difference to Jesuit Social Services, and it would potentially also help make a difference in terms of changing policy and legislation and working towards a more effective youth justice system. He just felt really proud of himself to know that he had a role to play in that his story was really going to be heard by a lot of people and have an impact on people as well.
Yeah, that's actually the video that I'd seen prior to coming into this role with Worth Second Chance that was so moving. So I'll link to that below because that is a really
Great.
excellent video, and really, really powerful. Charles's story that he shares so generously as well. He's very vulnerable in that video, which is really incredible to see. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us, Kathryn, and sharing your insights and kind of what you do to navigate. It was really, really interesting. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Bye.